Thank you so much. So ladies and gentlemen, we have a star panel this evening. Adab Swift on the extreme right, Saeed Naqvi, Swaminathan Iyer. Swami and Saeed Naqvi are India's top journalists. Adab Swift is one of Egypt's best-known novelists. I'm just going to read a short bio of her. She is the author of the best-selling The Map of Love, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize for Fiction in 1999. Ms. Swift is also a political and cultural commentator. She writes regularly for The Guardian newspaper in London and has a weekly column for Al-Shuruq in Cairo. A collection of her essays, Mezzatera, Fragments from the Common Ground, was published in 2004. Her translation from Arabic into English of Murid Barghuti's I Saw Ramallah also came out in 2004. She's written on Cairo, her city, a variety of stories, and if any of you are interested in accessing her work tonight, you should just go to the to the Guardian website, and you have stories or pieces written by Ada from 2011, from January 2011 to now. So we have 5 years of Adab Swift on the Tahrir Square uprising. We have one missing panelist this evening, Nadeem Aslam, who was supposed to be here. He hasn't come because he hasn't got a visa. And I'm just wondering, Adab, Saeed, and Swami, if we can perhaps look at our session this evening, which is called Walls, Brawls, and Changing, what is it? The Changing World Order. And if we can talk a little bit about why do you think Nadeem Aslam didn't get a visa? So I'm going to ask you, Swami. So the theme is Walls, Brawls, and Changing World Borders.
Yeah. Okay. So right now you have a situation of Brexit in England, Trump's election, trends even before that, of, shall we say, Corbyn in the USA, in the opposition party, or Sanders in the USA, or Le Pen now being talked about winning the French election. In India, I would say the revolt of the Jats, the Hardik Patels, various other people, a very large number of people dissatisfied, complaining, and a tendency to look inward, saying this large globalized world, is this all that it's promised to be? Why am I not getting what I thought was going to be my place in the sun? And if this is a large global phenomenon, what is causing it? I would say I see 4 broad trends. One is, for unexplained reasons, a sharp drop in global productivity. The same amount of investment is giving much less output. Because there is much less to go around, people are suddenly dissatisfied. There are various theories on why productivity has dropped. Some people say that earlier we had the benefit of electricity and the internal combustion engine, which has been finished, and the new internet and so on have not yet created a rival. So we have this drop so the world investment is still high, but the amount that's being produced is so much less that everybody is deprived. The second issue is one of automation of various kinds. There was a time when it only affected low-end people. It had then begun to affect middle people. Now it's affecting high-end people. Indian information technology companies now find that the lower end is all getting automated. They are all in serious trouble because even they find that they are getting automated. And people are suddenly getting worried, will there be any jobs in the future? The third issue that's been raised is globalization. This is an issue more in the West because they say my job has either been automated or it has been Bangalored, offshore to Bangalore, or it has been sent to China. It's worth pointing out that the same phenomenon, which is in some sense creating a problem in those countries, is solving a problem in developing countries. We have had this huge improvement in living standards in China, India, and other places, and that is part of the same process. And if you look at equality globally, global equality has improved. It may have gone down in America, it may be a problem for them. Funnily enough, inequality has also increased in China and India. because of this rise of the middle class and the business class. But if you add it up at a global level, global equality has improved tremendously, even as the individual country inequality has improved. So globalization in some sense has done its job, but the question is there going to be some other government mechanism to pick this up together and redistribute it to people? Because enough people are not partaking of it. We are beginning to get, in industry after industry also, a winner-takes-all thing. We have companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook. They are sitting on piles, trillions of dollars of cash which they can't use. Whereas other people are lacking money. And the question is, in this kind of winner-take-all thing where a few companies amass huge sums of money while others are losing out, is there something structurally problematic which is then going to lead to walls and is going to lead to brawls? We're getting sounds of protectionist walls, of trade wars in the form of brawls. When things go wrong, it's very easy to blame the foreigner. So there's lots of things of, the foreigner has done that, or the Mexicans have done it, or if you go to Europe, they will say, it's all the Romanians and the East Europeans, they're coming and has done it. So wherever you get it, you get these particular ethnic and other tensions coming up. So there is this particular mix. I would simply say, on balance, it is a positive thing that global inequality has come down. It is a positive thing that global trade and integration is still improving, though certainly a number of barriers have come up. And while there will have to be some internal adjustments, I will not be surprised if we get some things like a much higher minimum wage in the Western countries, or the idea of a universal basic income, various new ideas being put forward to solve the new problem that has come about. But the process of globalization, I think, will still proceed, even though we will see interruptions of various kinds.
Thank you. So that's a succinct economist's take on the world. So drop in productivity, automation, and globalization. Adaf, can I get your point of view? Can you hear me okay? Okay. Can you, is this better? So I'm just going to lean forward. So what is your take on the theme of this evening? Why do you think, as a writer, first of all, do you think that nations and individuals are retreating into themselves? As somebody who's covered the Tahrir Square uprising and followed closely the Arab Spring across the Arab world, what is your take on, is the Arab world sort of does it want to rejoin the rest of the world, or does it want to sort of stay in its own region?
No, I think if we're talking about who wants to be with the world and who doesn't, then let's look at Donald Trump's America, let's look at Brexit in England, and so on. So I think that we are in a particular historical phase where the world saw itself being divided up in the 20th century, really. And you had a time of the nation state, you had a time of the great partitions, this country being one, Palestine being another, and so on. And I think that there's something very different happening now in the 21st century. I think that even though right now it doesn't look like it, I think that there is, in fact, a tremendous drive to see the world as one unit. And I think that something...
See the world in?
As one unit. Obviously not by the governments, not by the powers, but I think by people. I think that there are certain things that are happening now that were not happening, say, at the beginning of the 20th century. One of them is that global communications are just so much better, that people are or can be in constant touch with each other, that they know much more of what's happening in other parts of the world, and so on. And another is that there is a sense, particularly among young people, that there is an overarching problem, threat to the planet, which is really the environmental and ecological threats. I mean, I don't think that the planet has felt as precarious, as dangerous ever as it does now. And the third thing and last thing is that it seems as if the sort of economic systems of the past have been discredited. That, you know, we had this whole thing about the end of history and how capitalism is really like the solution to everything, and that has been proved to be not true. Capitalism has been proved to have failed most people, and yet, of course, the left is struggling to come up with some new idea that will inspire people. So I think that with these three things, my sense is that young people are actually looking for a way forward that involves thinking of the planet as a whole interactive unit, that it is not acceptable that it should only be capital that has free movement, but human beings get killed at borders, that walls are put up. So the walls and the borders and the pulling back that we're seeing now, I see it as a reaction, as the reaction of regimes and of states against this drive by the young. And I see it really as the ferocious and potentially very cruel last gasp of the old regime, the old way of doing things.
So connect it with what's happening in your country. It's been 5 years since the uprising. So connect what you just said with what's happening in Egypt.
Well, if you look at what happened in Tahrir Square, firstly, see how it was inspired actually by what was happening elsewhere, Tunis, for example. See how at the time of the revolution, how Egypt felt so opened out onto the world, how the whole world was watching Tahrir and wishing it well. The influx of people who wanted to be part of what was happening in Egypt and the welcome that Tahrir Square gave people, the connections that were made between protest movements in the States, in Spain, in Greece, I mean, just sort of all over. There was some in India, there was certainly in Palestine. So there was certainly very, very much a sense of openness, of being part of the world, and of trying to work out a way forward, a way that was more fair for everybody. And it was very, very much about diversity, about embracing difference, about being out there. And look at where we are now, where I was going to say comprehensively defeated, but I don't believe in comprehensive. I believe that we are in a phase of terrible, terrible defeat, where we have the old regime has come back in a much more extreme, much more ferocious, much more endgame kind of manifestation. And look at what it has done. I mean, I'll just give you one thing, that, for example, when the I was just talking about the openness of the period of the revolution, early 2011. As soon as the military, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces took control, SCAF, one of the things that they started doing was building walls, physical walls, in downtown Cairo. And that was to impede the movement of protests and to cut people off from each other. And so suddenly we had Israeli-style walls cutting off central streets in downtown Cairo. Now, the first couple of walls, people started dismantling them with just crowbars, with whatever they could find. But, of course, the army was much quicker and much stronger. And so what people did was the artists of the revolution painted the walls. And you had amazing scenes, and they are recorded. Of course, they've all been pulled down, or they've all been washed over. But you suddenly, these ugly walls were transformed into beach scenes, tropical paradises, rainbows, children playing, trompe d'oeils, where you could see the streets behind them, and so on. So there was a complete rejection of walls, of the idea of a wall. Now, today, if you visit downtown Cairo, if you visit any part of Cairo, the walls, I cannot tell you, every embassy, every police station, every anything to do with the state, banks, ministries, there are these huge gray cement walls outside them. Not only that, but prisons. Now, walls are to keep certain people in and to keep other people out. Since this government has come into being, We have 20 new prisons, and that is like giant prison complexes, 20 in less than 3 years. So this is about building walls. I don't think ultimately that you can keep, that the things that they want to keep behind walls, I don't think they can be kept behind walls forever. But that's what's happening.
So Saeed, here in India, we think of India as one of the few democracies in Asia, right from the expanse, from Japan to Israel. If you look at the arc of Asia, India is perhaps one or two of the democracies. But do you, and we've been sort of an outwardly we are an inward-looking nation, but we like to engage with the world. You've written so much about the world yourself. But do you think that in the last few years, and I'm not saying only in the current Modi government, but in the last few years, do you think that Indians are retreating within themselves?
May I, Jyoti, the problem with this instrument is that it is meant to amplify things for you, which probably it is doing, but it is making things extremely inaudible across these benches here. So I have heard something, but I've got your question. May I add my little bit? You see, I will take for instance, Swami is a brilliant economist, and he has given you that sketch. You have your own worm's eye view from Egypt. And if I may dwell on India a little, if I might place India in a perspective, because I have been witness to history in the sense that I was there. And there are certain incidents. I will take a slightly historical view of things. I believe I'm a great one who believes that the balance of terror was terrific for us. That the Cold War was wonderful. We were at peace. None of these brawls, shawls were taking place. It just so happened that when the collapse of the Soviet Union is the single point, and we must keep referring to it again and again, not because of any nostalgia, because the subsequent events, as were managed by the leaders of the West, etc., have led to the present condition. Now, what have I been witness to? I'll give you one example. Immediately after the Soviet collapse, the imprimatur had to be that a system had lost, another system had won, and the signature had to be put on it. That was the Operation Desert Storm. You had immediately, 1991, that happens, and 92 February, Operation Desert Storm happens, and I am there on the terrace of Al Rashid Hotel. My friend Peter Arnett inaugurates a historical event which, if we forget, we shall miss out many of the points. He inaugurates a historical moment. What is it? For the first time, we begin to see in our drawing rooms a live war. Now, that live war is a great performance of Western machinery, war machine. It comes across to Western audiences as a terrific march of triumphalism. And by the same visuals come across to the Arabs, to the Iraqis, to the entire Muslim world as yet another example of defeat, humiliation. In other words, the same global media which is born that day is by one beaming the same program creates two diametrically opposite and hostile audiences. That is the beginning of the end of the balance of terror, which was so peaceful for us. Now, you had the media was going to prime open societies, multinationals were going to come in, globalization, Tom Friedman was going to declare the world is flat, and it was all going to go hunky-dory. Then 2008 happened. And this sort of incomplete project.
The Mumbai attacks. You're talking about the Mumbai attacks in 2008?
No, 2008 is the collapse of Lehman Brothers.
Lehman
That is
Brothers.
when the global economic...
well, since we are sitting in Mumbai, it's a...
Yeah.
It's a
So that is the, according to me, when the divisions begin to take place, globalization is an incomplete project. Aspirations have been made. Today, in our country, you have all these law institutes. Fancy law institutes have been opened. They were opened because everything, economy was going to boom. It was going to go through the ceiling. Multinationals were coming. All these brilliant lawyers were going to be required to have corporate law was going to be the thing. Suddenly you find that there are shells. All these kids, they're 20 years behind times now. They're doing law, then they're coming out and doing something else because the whole world has changed. And the retreat, the manner in which this triumphalism leading to a complete and total destruction of an ancient civilization like Iraq, of Syria, of Libya, of Afghanistan, creation of all these waves of refugees, the complete mayhem that was created by the sheer mismanagement of globalization.
So how would you connect India?
We are part of that.
How would you connect that?
We would connect because our economies began to go wrong. Manmohan Singh's first phase was fine. It was pre-2008 phase. 2008 onwards, everything went into a tizzy. And it has never recovered since. So, and that is why sorry.
No, I was just going to ask Swami if you, firstly, do you agree with what Saeed says? And B, if I could ask you to put on your civilizational cap. It's been 25 years since the end of the Soviet Union. You did give your point of view on, on globalization and how that impacts. But if you put India at the center of your world, how would you look at the next 25?
Just to take up some of the points I mean, I would have very significant disagreements. To me, the main phenomenon that has come is not, that there was one power which has ruined everything. It is rather that we had a time when the state was extremely powerful and the individual and organizations were relatively powerless. And there was a pitiless, large state stamping down on individual, and you had to worry about individual rights. Because of modern technology, the ability of a single individual to create a bomb, to create a squad, to create an organization that can take on and defeat the state, that capacity has increased 100-fold. So where the individual could do very little mischief by using the technologies of 70s, 80s, and 90s, by today, and you see that everywhere. You see in India, you are unable to control it. The internet, the ability to spread bomb messages.
Give us an India context.
No, I'm saying India is part of it.
Yeah.
So some of the disruptions that you see within India, the rise of terrorism in India is very small compared to what's happened somewhere else. But in every case, you find basically there is a helpless state. Once upon a time, the states, whether it was the United States, Soviet Union, Saddam Hussein, it doesn't matter where you look, or the government of India, you were very easily able to stamp out these small organizations. That capacity has been lost, the capacity of small organizations to get up, disrupt, and hold states at bay. And there is no answer. Today, if you say, at the end of 15 years, I would say Al-Qaeda or the jihadis have basically defeated all the biggest states of the world, and it's rising. I would say this is ultimate. I mean, that's only one example. I can give you other examples. Basically, where you had a very powerful state and powerless individuals and powerless groups, you now have a situation where progressively the states are becoming powerless and the individual groups are able to do more and more. This is causing a serious amount of civilizational, you asked for civilizational act. This is a problem in India. So people are able to mobilize on various individual platforms. Jihad is not the only one. I would say caste is equally one, religion. There are different platforms on which small individuals can mobilize and disrupt, and the state becomes a relatively helpless spectator, and we are definitely getting more and more, therefore, of these brawls and wars across the world.
But in Egypt, the state is not getting weaker. The state is getting stronger, right?
The military is getting stronger.
Yeah, absolutely, you're right. Well, the state is trying to project power, but what is a state? I mean, so basically the institutions of state are really, in Egypt, they're quite hollowed out. So for example, the judiciary, which used to be a really sort of solid, well-respected institution, has now become completely corrupt and is seen as simply an arm of the state, not an independent thing. Education, we used to, when I was at Cairo University, we used to be ranking among, the top 50 in the world. And now education has dropped. You have kids coming out of schools not knowing how to read and write. I don't know, healthcare, whatever, you name it. The media completely co-opted.
So sorry to interrupt you, but why is your people's revolution, why is it still incomplete?
Because the military and the security sort of apparatus, the police and the various security apparatuses have, joined by the judiciary, joined by the media, have basically made common cause against the people. And so now it is incredible, I mean, it is almost impossible to, to do any of the things that you would expect to be able to do in a democratic state. And I'm not really just talking about street protests, although street protests are incredibly dangerous. But for example, Parliament just passed a law 3 days ago, more or less outlawing all NGO work. So any organization, civil society organization, legal, working to defend people or rehabilitating victims of torture, physicians, whatever, now has to go through security. So basically there is a tremendous attack on the civilian population, and we have about 60,000 people in prison. We have people being disappeared every week. We have people just like, in the last 2 weeks, 5 of our most well-respected professionals who have been solidly on the side of democracy and reform and human rights, simply one after the other, when they went to the airport to go to attend a conference or whatever, were prevented from traveling. So that is why the revolution is incomplete. And meanwhile, of course, you have so much violence, again, engendered by the state and by terrorist groups, which get bigger and, or kind of more and more active. So that if eventually there is another uprising, it's very hard to see how it can be peaceable or constructive like the last one. It's pure force, really.
So the organizers are telling me that we have very little time, so perhaps I shall just open the discussion to the House. We have a few minutes, so if anybody wants to ask a question. Nobody? Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
1, 2. I must say.
Hello. Yeah. My question is, does globalization or anti-globalization, to be honest, anti-globalization signal an end to the practices which have been carried on throughout the past century, and we may see a new century whereby protectionism and probably anti-globalism would be promoted over the next few years.
Swami, did you get that?
I couldn't hear properly.
So, do you think you could foresee a time when globalization and protectionism would be completely phased out? Is that your question?
Yes, yes. Whether protectionism would be the new in thing in the next
There's a big
few
audio,
years.
there's an audio problem. Why did you come here? Just walk here and say what's your question. Yahan bolo.
Yeah, it's okay.
No, with the mic.
My question is, the last century we've seen a rise in globalization,
Right.
whereby nations expand by growing their capacities and growing their productions. Do you see a future whereby every nation grows more inward and we have more protectionism, whereby the state is the supreme and we grow more inwards?
Thanks.
No, I think we need to understand that in every single country, there have always been protectionist and inward-looking lobbies and globalizing and outward-looking lobbies. It has never been a complete sweep for anybody. There has always been a mix of the two. On balance, the globalization plus outward-looking fellows have been winning over the inward-looking guys for the last 20, 30 years. Now you may find a few more battles are won by the protectionist and inward, but it is not a complete switch one way or the other. This much I am confident of. Wherever you get somebody seriously trying to retreat inwards and away from globalization, that particular experiment, I think within 5 years, will show that that path cannot lead you to greater prosperity. So you'll once again then have to look for something else. And I said, some of these forces that you are seeing are deep structural forces like the collapse of productivity or the rise of automation, which cannot be solved by this idea of looking outward or looking inward or blaming this particular religion or blaming that particular foreigner or blaming this particular leader. There are deep structural reasons which will have to be tackled in my view.
Any more questions? Okay.
Yes, there's a question over here.
Use the mic.
Hello. Very good evening. My question is,
Close to the mouth and deliberately, clearly, yourself. Speak clearly.
Okay. Could you comment on the role of diasporic and immigrant community in changing world borders?
Who is the question to?
Anyone?
Would you like to take the question? The
If you could repeat the question once again, please.
why didn't you take that question? I think, you know what, we'll take one or two more questions.
Yeah, I've got it. The role of diaspora.
The last question for the session.
yes. So my question is it audible? Yes. So my question is, with Mr. Narendra Modi, our Prime Minister, yes.
Put the mic in front of
Back
your
in front of the mouth.
And slowly.
Yes. Yesterday, Mr. Narendra Modi, our Prime Minister, announced, is it audible?
Yes.
Yes, the Prime Minister announced
That we should use Amazon-like platforms to as a business platform for doing businesses. So, do you think for an economy like India, is it feasible in the long run, wherein we are, for example, agriculture is one of our strengths when it comes to doing the occupation of the major occupation in India. So, do you think this is
Did you
a
understand that?
The
So
Prime-
Modi said yesterday that we should use the
the Amazon-like platform to doing every single business in India?
Amazon as the future.
Yes. Digital platform.
Digital platforms like Amazon. Modi said that we should use digital platforms like Amazon to do our work. Do you think that that's workable, or is that a new wall that
No, the digital platforms are a reality and they are coming. I mean, there are people who are now incapable of writing a letter. There are people who are incapable of my son seems incapable of a phone call. He only does SMSs. So, will digital media be used? And the answer is yes, increasingly.
No, my question is for the agriculture industry, how will it benefit somebody from the...
Yeah, it's okay. That's a very specific sort of question. Saeed, would you like to connect the question on diaspora and immigrant communities with Adav's last comment on how the lack of democracy inside Egypt has in some way resulted in the situation today? I'm asking you, India is a democracy. Can we stop this music, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that India's democracy is strong because we are a democracy, we are able to withstand the traumas that countries like Egypt have?
We should not be terribly smug about the security of the institutions that underpin our democracy. That is my first observation. I think we have to be much greater vigilance is required for us to sit back and say, I am not sanguine about day after tomorrow. Yes, we are better than many, but we have deteriorated in many ways also. For example, Swami made an interesting point. He made an interesting point that the states, the individuals can take on the state and immobilize states, he mentioned in his. Now here you've got an opposite situation here. The state can, there is nobody, for instance, assuming that there is great public anger on this demonetization drive, assuming there is. Now, we face a situation, Jyoti, that there is nobody of any credibility anywhere on the whole horizon who can A, tap, A, stoke this anger, B, harness this anger, and therefore these are very, very serious dangers to our democratic institutions. Having said that, yes, the glass is still half full. The glass is still half full compared to the way where Egypt has gone. And I sometimes wonder whether this whole march of democracies as a proselytization process should not be re-looked at again, because creation of democracies, the regime change, etc., have not worked. And yet, Saddam Hussein was bad, so he's been taken away. But you have Singapore, which is working. So maybe there are models which we can rework and look at them. Why is Singapore, is it a paragon of democratic virtue? Is it? And yet Singapore is completely acceptable to all of us. Is Malaysia, is it a paragon? What Mahathir Mohamad did, he brought the economy of that country to astronomical heights. Is it? So democracy per se, individual states, Jyoti, I have a feeling we have to look at it again. Whether this whole one proselytization process is one solution, is good for all societies, I am not terribly certain.
I'd like just to say something on the diaspora, which has been said.
Okay. So we're running out of...
I think the diaspora has been a fantastically positive element. It has been a positive element in one way, it's just the remittance economies that are going. India gets foreign aid of 5 billion and the remittances are 70 billion. in country after country which was dependent on foreign aid, the diaspora has more than replaced. So the countries have become much, much more independent, much more capable. The flows are humongous. They are much more than foreign direct investment, foreign aid, everything put together. So that is one indicator of it. The second indicator is the way in which it has changed perceptions. I would say in India above all. The BJP was one party which has the Swadeshi Jagaran Manch, which was dead against foreign investment, dead against the foreigner, and yet for the first time, you have Mr. Narendra Modi going to country after country after country, saying, I want foreign investment, in a way in which no secular prime minister ever did before. They say, what is Modi up to? And the answer to Mr. Narendra Modi says, you know, once upon a time, if you ask the multinational come to India, it meant that white man is going to come and rule again. Now, if I call Google, there is actually a gentleman there called Sundar Pichai who's running it. If you call Microsoft, Sundar Pichai. If you call Microsoft, it is Satya Nadella who is running it. If you call Pepsi, Indira Nooyi is running it. So suddenly, he says the idea that globalization meant that they take us over. Actually, you know, we are taking them over.
So the East India Company syndrome. So Swami, the East India Company, can we say goodbye to the East India Company syndrome?
It is definitely going. I mean, for the BJP to make this turnaround, and it could not have happened except for the diaspora.
To add to Swami's point in a lighter vein, since it is ending, in 1974, the Australians stopped their whites-only policy. Now some Sikhs and Sardarjis had gone to a place south of Brisbane called Wulgulga, and they were working in the banana plantations, very difficult plantations to work on. In 1974, when the white-only thing happened, suddenly, talking of diasporas, every schoolboy in the entire Pacific who carries tiffin to school carries a banana grown by Sikhs from India, because the entire monopoly of banana plantation in that area is in Sikh hands.
Ladies and gentlemen, a hand for Ada Swift, Saeed Naqvi, Swaminathan Iyer.